a balance sheet deadline written 5 years ago that has been sitting on a calendar ever since. Claim 2. The 21 industries that break first are not the ones the headlines point at. They are the ones with the most debt rolling over and the least pricing power. I will name every single one, and I will tell you which group your job sits in. Claim 3. The damage will be concentrated and uneven, which means the economy will look almost normal on the national numbers right up until the marginal firms fail and the institutions carrying them fail with them. 3 claims. I will close all 3 before this video ends. On this channel, we do not do panic and we do not do cheerleading. We follow the incentives. Ground first, analysis second. 6 facts. 1. According to S&P Global, total U.S. corporate debt maturities jumped from roughly $2 trillion in 2024 to roughly $3 trillion in 2026. 50% more debt refinanced in a single year, at rates that are multiples of what it was issued at. 2. The leveraged finance data firm 9fin counts 237 publicly traded U.S. and Canadian high-yield companies carrying $79.2 billion maturing in 2026 and $140.3 billion in 2027. That is not a forecast. That is a schedule of contracts already signed. 3. In the second quarter of 2026, the New York Fed reported credit card balances at $1.26 trillion, up $21 billion in a single quarter, and auto loan balances at $1.71 trillion. 4. Fitch data shows subprime auto delinquencies of 60 days or more hit 6.9% in January of 2026. Highest reading since 1994. A 32-year record. 5. Credit card balances more than 90 days. Delinquent went from 7.6% in mid-2022 to 12.8% by early 2026. 6. Moody's puts national office vacancy near a 40-year high, around 20%. I am not interpreting any of that yet. Those are the coordinates. Settled, dated, public. Now the mechanism, because a thing you can name is a thing you can track. I call it the rollover squeeze. Start in a house, because that is where the arithmetic is easiest to feel. You bought in 2021, 30-year mortgage, 3%. Now imagine that mortgage does not actually last 30 years. Imagine it matures in 5, and on that morning you refinance the whole balance at whatever the market charges. $400,000 at 3% costs you about $1,686 a month. The same $400,000 at 9% costs about $3,219. $19,000 additional dollars a year, after tax, for the identical house. Your job did not change. Your spending did not change. Your credit did not change. The only thing that changed is the date on a contract. That is the rollover squeeze, and it has no opinion about how responsible you are. Now, scale it up one level. A company with $2 billion in bonds issued at 3% does not lie awake, wondering what the Fed will do next year. It watches one date. $2 billion at 3% is $60 million a year in interest. The same $2 billion at 8% is $160 million. That extra $100 million comes out of operating income before a single employee is paid. If the company earns $200 million in operating income, that is not a headwind. That is the entire business. Now scale it once more, and this is the level almost nobody models correctly. A regional bank with $40 billion in commercial real estate loans does not care about the stock market. It cares about the day those loans roll and the collateral gets revalued. Watch what that means. A building appraised at $100 million in 2021, financed at 60% loan to value, carries a $60 million loan. Suppose that building is worth $60 million today. The loan now equals the entire asset. To refinance at the same standard, the borrower has to write a check for $24 million in fresh equity. That money does not exist. It was never going to exist. And notice, the tenant never left. Occupancy never changed. The loan fails because the appraiser showed up. That is the rollover squeeze at every scale. The gap between the rate a balance sheet was built on and the rate it must be rebuilt on. That gap is now the widest it has been in a generation, for the simple reason that the debt was built at the lowest rates in history and comes due at the highest. If you want to run that arithmetic on your own numbers, your mortgage, your car note, your employer's debt schedule, the opening section of the Crisis Blueprint walks you through it in about 20 minutes. Link is in the description. Come back, though, because the next part is the part I actually made this video for, 21 industries, and I did not pick them by reading headlines. There is exactly one test for membership. Does this business have to refinance at a higher rate? Or does it sell something a household can cancel the month its payment jumps? Either answer puts you on the list. Both answers put you near the top. They come in 5 groups, and I will be honest with you about the order. The first group you have probably heard about. The last group is the one I have not seen anyone else name, and it is the one most likely to include your employer. Group 1, the collateral that has to be repriced. 1, office real estate. 20% vacancy is the number everybody quotes, but vacancy is not the problem. The loans on those towers were sized against 2021 rents, 2021 occupancy, and cap rates near 4%. Reprice the cash flow and the cap rate at the same time, and you do not get a discount. You get a different asset class. Every one of those loans matures into an appraisal. 2, commercial construction. The cranes you see today were financed 2 and 3 years ago. That is the tell. A backlog looks healthy right up until it is delivered, because a backlog is a record of decisions already made. New starts need new debt from lenders who are already over-allocated to the sector. So the backlog empties and nothing refills it. 3, hotels. 3 poisons at once. A large share of hotel debt floats. Demand is discretionary on one side and expense account driven on the other, and franchise agreements force expensive property improvements on a schedule the owner does not control. Floating debt, cancelable revenue, mandatory spending. That combination only works when money is cheap. 4, regional and community banks. This is the wire that carries everything else. Commercial real estate credit sits concentrated in banks far below money center size, at concentrations the biggest banks would never be permitted to run. They are paying more for deposits than they were 3 years ago while holding loans underwritten at prices that no longer clear. They have exactly one tool. The tool is delay. 5, multifamily and apartment syndications. This one almost never makes anybody's list, and I think it belongs near the top. Enormous volumes of apartment buildings were bought in 2021 on short-term floating rate bridge debt, on the assumption rents would keep climbing forever. Then the interest rate caps expired. Insurance rose. Taxes rose. And rent growth flattened in exactly the cities that got the most new supply. In a lot of those deals, the equity is already gone. The maturity date is simply the day everyone finds out. Group 2, the shadow lenders who took the risk the banks could no longer carry. 6, private credit. It grew up entirely inside the era of free money and has never once been tested by a default cycle. Here is its specific weakness. The loans are not traded, so the values are estimated rather than observed. When a borrower struggles, the fund can amend the terms, capitalize the interest, and keep carrying the loan near par. That works beautifully, until an investor asks for their money back, and the estimate has to become a transaction. 7, subprime auto lenders. We already have their number. 6.9%, 32-year high. Understand what sits underneath it. Vehicles bought at 2021 prices, financed over 72 and 84 months, now worth less than the loan against them. That borrower cannot sell, cannot refinance, cannot trade out. There are 2 options left: pay or stop paying. 8, the specialty finance companies behind them. Every non-bank lender borrows short to lend long, funded by warehouse lines with advance rates and collateral tests that reset. When collateral performs badly, the advance rate falls. So the lender needs more cash at the exact moment it has less. That is not a slow decline. That is a company originating loans 1 week and gone the next. 9, non-bank mortgage lenders and servicers. Origination has been dead for years because nobody holding a 3% mortgage volunteers to give it up. So you have an industry built for volume, operating without volume, running on thin servicing margins, financed by counterparties who read the same delinquency reports you and I just read. Quick orientation, because we are almost halfway. Groups 1 and 2 are the lenders and the collateral. That is the plumbing. Groups 3 and 4 are demand and hype. Group 5 is the one that will surprise you. If you already know which one you work in, stay for it. If you do not, stay for all of them. Because I promise you, the layer these industries share matters more than any single name on the list. Group 3, discretionary demand that vanishes in a single month. 10, casual dining. Restaurant margins live in the low single digits, so a 3% decline in traffic is not a bad quarter. It is the entire profit. Many of these chains are private equity owned. Many sold their own real estate in sale leasebacks to fund a dividend, converting an asset they owned into a bill they owe every month. Thin margins, fixed costs, and the single most cancelable line in any household budget. 11. Mall-based retail. Occupancy cost is contractual. Sales are not. When sales fall, rent as a share of revenue rises, and nothing on earth pulls it back down. Then add co-tenancy clauses, which let the remaining tenants cut rent or walk when an anchor leaves. One departure cascades through the whole property, and then straight into the loan on the property. 12. Airlines. Enormous fixed costs, aircraft financed with debt, and demand split between a business half being permanently restructured and a leisure half that households delete first. And here is the cruel part. Airlines cut prices into weakness, so revenue falls faster than the capacity reduction that would fix it. 13. Advertising and marketing agencies. There is an iron rule in every finance department under pressure. Marketing goes first because the damage is invisible for 2 quarters, which makes agencies a leading indicator of corporate stress rather than a lagging one. And the holding companies above them carry debt of their own. 14. Home improvement, furniture, and big-ticket home goods. This whole sector is a derivative of housing turnover, and housing turnover is frozen because people with 3% mortgages do not move. Then compound it. A large share of this spending is financed on store cards, promotional 0% terms, and home equity lines. The trigger event and the payment method are impaired simultaneously. Group 4. Growth that was never actually profitable. 15. Unprofitable electric vehicle manufacturers. Manufacturing is the most capital-hungry business that exists, and these companies were built on an assumption of continuous cheap capital. Remove it and the burn rate becomes a countdown clock. Published quarterly, visible to everybody, including their suppliers. 16. Unprofitable consumer tech and direct-to-consumer startups. The model was to buy a customer for more than the customer is worth and make it up in the next round. That is a strategy only while capital is free. Many also carry venture debt, which sits senior to the founders, the employees, and the venture funds, with covenants that get tested the moment growth slows. 17. Private higher education. Smaller private colleges face a shrinking population of traditional-age students, discount tuition so heavily that the published price is fiction, and sit on campuses financed with bonds issued when enrollment projections looked completely different. Fixed physical plant, falling enrollment, debt service that does not negotiate. 18. Clinical stage biotechnology. No revenue at all by design. These companies survive by selling equity on a schedule dictated by their cash runway. When the window closes, the science does not stop being good. It just stops being funded, and the assets go to whoever still has a balance sheet. Group 5. The leveraged operators nobody puts on a list. 19. Private equity-owned healthcare services. Physician staffing groups, dental and veterinary roll-ups, specialty practices, bought with heavy leverage on the theory that scale improves pricing power. But revenue is set by insurers and reimbursement schedules. The operator does not negotiate, while labor costs are set by a market the operator does not control. Fixed revenue, rising costs, leverage structure. That is not a management problem. That is a mathematical trap, and no operator gets out of it by working harder. 20. Trucking and freight. Thousands of small carriers bought equipment at peak prices during the boom, financed it, and now haul at spot rates set by a market drowning in capacity. The debt sits on rolling stock that is already depreciated. Freight is also the cleanest real-time read on goods demand in this economy, which makes it both a victim and an instrument. Watch it either way. 21. Staffing and recruiting. Staffing is the first derivative of hiring, which means it turns before employment does. Companies stop using contractors before they lay off employees, and they stop backfilling open roles before they do either. So when you see staffing revenue fall, you are not looking at a forecast of the labor market. You are looking at the labor market roughly 2 quarters before the official data admits it. 21 industries, 1 mechanism. And now look at the shape of that list, because this is the part I wanted you to see. It is not a sector. It is a layer. It cuts through real estate, banking, retail, healthcare, transport, biotech, and education. industries with nothing in common operationally, which is exactly what you get from a mechanism that operates on balance sheets instead of on products. That is claim 2, closed. 21 names, and the logic to test every one of them yourself. If your employer was on that list and your stomach dropped slightly, that is the correct reaction, and it is also actionable. The crisis blueprint includes a walkthrough for pulling your own company's debt maturity schedule out of its public filings. It takes about an hour, and it will tell you more about your job security than any performance review. Now the timing, because timing is where almost everyone gets this wrong. The wall peaks in exactly the wrong year. In May of 2026, the IMF warned that global public debt would exceed $100 trillion this year, roughly 93% of global GDP, and that gross global debt reaches 100% of global GDP by 2029, a full year earlier than they previously estimated. Then, in July of 2026, the labor market cracked in the aggregate numbers. Employers cut 23,000 jobs in July alone, and the revisions added another 103,000 losses to May and June. Stay on the revisions for a second, because the revisions are the more important number. A revision means the economy was already weaker than reported during the exact weeks everybody was calling it strong. The economy did not change in July. Our knowledge of it did, which should make you ask a very uncomfortable question about what is being reported right now. So the wall and the cracks are arriving together. The refinancing deadline and the first wave of layoffs are not two separate stories. They are one event viewed from two sides of the same balance sheet. Let me connect all of it, because it only makes sense at once. Credit card balances at $1.26 trillion are not evidence of a confident consumer. They are evidence of a household that already spent its savings and is now borrowing at 21% to keep the lights on. Subprime auto delinquency at a 32-year high is not a subprime problem. It is the leading edge of the same mechanism that reaches commercial real estate, then the banks, then private credit, in that order. 20% office vacancy stopped being a work-from-home story years ago. It is a collateral story, because those towers are the collateral behind loans that roll in 2027. And $3 trillion of corporate maturities is not a number on a spreadsheet. It is the date. Every balance sheet built in 2020 and 2021 gets repriced at once. That is not a crash. That is a rollover. And a rollover is worse, because a crash is over quickly, and a rollover takes years. Which brings me to the part where I argue against myself. Because I want to be straight with you. The bull case here is stronger than most people making videos like this will admit. And if I skip it, I am selling you something instead of explaining something. U.S. household net worth hit a record above $180 trillion in the third quarter of 2025 per the Fed's Z.1 data. The Fed has been cutting rates, which directly lowers the cost of refinancing. In the April 2026 Senior Loan Officer Survey, banks reported unchanged or even easier terms on most commercial real estate categories. That is not how an industry in distress behaves. And in the second quarter of 2026, JLL reported national office vacancy actually ticked down 60 basis points. First sustained improvement in years. The strongest version of that argument goes, the wall is manageable, the maturities are staggered, banks extend rather than foreclose, and a record household balance sheet carries the consumer through. And the staggering point is genuinely right. These maturities do not all land on one Tuesday. A decent business with a patient lender can push a maturity 2 years down the road and refinance into a friendlier market. That happens constantly. It is precisely why this wall has been predicted before without producing a crisis, and anybody who tells you otherwise is not being honest with you. But there is one thing the bull case cannot explain. It cannot explain why subprime auto delinquencies hit a 32-year high in January of 2026, while the aggregate economy was still being described as strong. Because the bull case reads the average, and the rollover squeeze does not kill the average. It kills the marginal. The marginal borrower always tells you the truth first, for a very simple reason. He has no cushion, no savings, and nobody willing to extend him credit while he figures it out. Which brings me to the single piece of evidence I cannot reconcile with the benign reading. Between mid-2022 and early 2026, the share of credit card balances more than 90 days delinquent nearly doubled, from 7.6% to 12.8%. That is not a projection. That is cash flow that has already stopped, money that already did not arrive. You cannot look at a consumer defaulting at that rate, standing in front of a $3 trillion refinancing wall, and call the outcome benign. And here is the precise implication. When the marginal borrower is already failing before the wall arrives, the wall does not cause the recession. It accelerates one that started without a headline. That is the difference between a theory and a mechanism. A theory can be argued with. A mechanism just runs, and it has run before. 3 times within living memory. Japan. When the asset bubble collapsed in 1990, the banks did not clear the bad debt. They extended it. They kept the zombies breathing. The result was not a sharp recession. It was 2 lost decades of stagnation and deflation, an entire generation of companies that could not die and could not grow. The government chose to carry the losses, and eventually the losses became the economy. China. Evergrande accumulated more than $300 billion in debt, and the moment the refinancing door closed, the entire property sector was locked out of the credit markets. By 2026, local governments were issuing more than $600 billion in bonds just to keep the system breathing. And one much closer to home, one that maps onto this list almost item for item. In the late 1980s, American savings and loans were sitting on commercial real estate lending underwritten at values that had quietly stopped being real. Regulators permitted forbearance, which is the accounting profession's phrase for looking away. The delay did not shrink the losses, it grew them. By the time the Resolution Trust Corporation was created in 1989, more than 1,000 institutions had failed, and taxpayers paid for the cleanup instead of shareholders. Same instrument every time. Commercial real estate held by small banks, valued by hope. And the lesson from all 3 is identical. When a debt wall meets a rollover squeeze, the state can postpone the day, but it cannot cancel the date. All it decides is whether the pain arrives as a sharp event or as a slow decade. The United States is standing at that intersection right now. Same choice, same calendar. So let me put myself on the record. 3 predictions, dated and falsifiable. Write them down. 1. Before the end of 2027, a U.S. regional bank with more than $50 billion in assets will be resolved by the FDIC or acquired in a forced sale driven by commercial real estate losses. 2. Before June of 2027, at least 2 of the following file for bankruptcy: a subprime auto lender, a private credit-backed retailer, or a casual dining chain with more than 500 locations. 3. By the end of 2027, national office vacancy exceeds 22%, and total U.S. credit card balances exceed $1.4 trillion. Those are not vibes. Those are numbers with dates attached. And here is exactly what would prove me wrong, so you can hold me to it. If 90-day credit card delinquency falls back below 10% while corporate maturities get absorbed without high-yield spreads widening, then the mechanism I just described is not running, and I will sit in this chair and say so. Now, 4 things you can watch yourself without waiting for a single anchor to tell you what is happening. First, the Fed's Senior Loan Officer Opinion Survey, published quarterly. Watch the net percentage of banks tightening standards on commercial real estate and on commercial and industrial loans. The moment that turns sharply negative, the wall has become a cliff, because a maturity is only survivable if somebody is willing to write the new loan. Second, the New York Fed's Household Debt and Credit Report, also quarterly. Watch the 90-day credit card rate and the subprime auto 60-day rate. Those are the canaries. They are already singing. Third, the high-yield spread. The gap between junk bond yields and treasury yields. When that blows out, refinancing stops being expensive and becomes impossible. Hold on to that distinction, because it is the whole ball game. Expensive debt shrinks a company. Unavailable debt ends one. Fourth, and this is the one nobody uses, WARN notices. The mass layoff filings in your own state. Aggregate employment data lags by months. WARN notices do not. They are filed by name, by employer, by date, and they are public. If a company from that list of 21 files one in your city, you are reading tomorrow's national headline today. And that brings me to claim 3, and to you. The aggregate economy is not where you live. You live in one industry, one employer, one mortgage, one balance sheet. When the headline says the economy is strong, it is describing the average of $180 trillion in household net worth, and most of that is owned by the top 10%. Your household is not the average. Your employer is not the average. The damage from this will be so uneven that half the country will experience 2027 as a bad news cycle, and the other half will experience it as the year everything changed. Those 21 industries are not abstract sectors. They are where people watching this work, and where the money of people watching this is invested. The rollover squeeze will not announce itself on the news. It announces itself in your paycheck, in your rent, in your credit card statement. So look at your own balance sheet, the way I just asked you to look at Japan and China and the savings and loans. What is your rate and when does it reset? What is your employer's debt and when does it mature? Where does your industry sit in the 21? That is not panic. That is preparation. And preparation is the only thing that has ever protected anybody from a date on a calendar. Which is exactly why I built the Crisis Blueprint. It is a step-by-step playbook for the next 18 months. Your cash position, your debt, your job security, and the assets most exposed to the rollover squeeze. It includes the maturity worksheet I mentioned earlier, an exposure checklist covering all 21 sectors on this list, and the exact quarterly indicators to track so you are reading the data before the headline is written. Link is in the description and pinned in the top comment. Most households recover the cost inside the first quarter of applying it, because